Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Standing Committee on Policy and Strategic Priorities meeting of October 28th, 2021, reconvening from October 21st, 26th, and 27th, 2021. This committee is being convened by electronic means as authorized under Part 14 of the Procedure Bylaw, and as such, committee members may participate in person or by electronic means. For committee members participating by electronic means, per the recently amended Procedure Bylaw, please ensure your video is turned on and let the Deputy City Clerk know if you leave the meeting for the purpose of confirming quorum. If a committee member loses connection during the voting process, staff will get you back online quickly while we suspend the voting process. The staff contact information has been circulated to you. Video of committee members speaking, presentations, and vote results will be projected on the live stream when available. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Thank them for having cared for these lands and look forward to working with them in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. I also want to take a moment to recognize the incredible contributions of the City of Vancouver staff who work hard every day to help make our city an incredible place to live, work, and play. Deputy City Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor Stewart.
Present.
Councillor Carr in the chair. Councillor DiGenova.
Present.
Councillor Fry.
Present.
Councillor Swanson.
Here.
Councillor Hardwick.
Present.
Councillor Weeb. Councillor Boyle.
Present.
Councillor Dominato has a leave of absence from 3 to 4 today. Councillor Bligh.
Present.
And Councillor Kirby.
Present.
The meeting has quorum, Chair Carr.
Thank you very much. I would like to go over the plan for today. The committee completed hearing from speakers yesterday. Due to heightened interest in the current agenda item, as well as the public's request, the public will be allowed to observe the proceedings in person, subject to adhering to the mandatory mask requirements. The public is also welcome to continue tracking the meeting progress online through updates on Twitter @VanCityClerk and by watching the live stream. Any comments on agenda items can be sent to committee members using the web form on the city's website. The link to that form will be tweeted out on @VanCityClerk. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's long-standing commitment to equity, diversion, and inclusion, including utmost respect for all genders. I remind committee members that when addressing speakers and staff, avoid using gendered honorifics and instead refer to the person by first and last name or role or title. We have one item of business continuing on today's agenda. Should the business not be completed prior to 5 p.m., we will recess for dinner and reconvene at 6 p.m. Should the business not be completed today, the backup date will be confirmed prior to recessing for the evening. Committee members were all present on October 21st. None declared a conflict of interest on this remaining agenda item. The committee received a staff presentation, asked 2 rounds of questions to staff, and completed hearing from speakers for item 2. Finally, I would like to remind committee members that if amendments are brought forward, they must be submitted to the Deputy City Clerk in final written form before the committee member introduces them. Please ensure the City Clerk has received your amendments by using Council Meeting Amendments-DL. We will now continue with agenda item 2, future of False Creek South, advancing conceptual development plan and addressing lease expiries. On October 21st, the committee suspended the rules, moved and approved a motion for a 3rd round of questions to staff following the conclusion of the speakers list. So committee members, we are now in the additional 3rd round of questions to staff, and you have up to 5 minutes to ask your questions. Well, I think staff must have done the most incredible job in answering all our questions ahead of time. Oh, wait a second, there are some. Okay, Councillor DiGenova, go ahead.
Thanks so much. I'm sorry I do have some more questions for staff, and I'm just wondering if staff might be able to comment on the role of the liaisons. I know that on May 30th, 2017, former councillors Affleck and Reimer were appointed as liaisons to the False Creek South plan. And just wondered if maybe there could be some comment on their involvement and how they were involved in the process.
Thank you very much for the question. Just from memory, Councillors Affleck and Reimer were appointed as council liaison. I believe they were in that role for, I'm going to say, about a year or a year and a half. They met with the community on several occasions without staff in that role, and also met with staff on several occasions without the community. The staff meetings were primarily just to brief these two councillors more deeply on the complexities of the file. And that was really it.
Okay. Thanks very much. That's
Sorry,
all.
sorry, there might have been a third role they played that I can't speak to, but it might be that what they learned through those two sets of meetings they brought back to their colleagues on council, but I can't speak to whether or how that happened.
And that they could provide, can I ask a follow-up question of the deputy city manager to the chair? I'm wondering, and they also could communicate to the community council's role and what council was doing. And so it worked both ways, that they could give the community assurance as to what their roles on council was in this process.
I can only speculate that they could do that. I can't say what they did do because I wasn't there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Chair Carr, I have a point of procedure. It's Councillor Bligh.
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to clarify. So I know when we have topics that garner the interest and also the level of questions, that staff will oftentimes just simply report out responses to questions as when there's many from a number of different councillors. And I wonder if that's a possibility to help expedite this part of the process to make sure that everybody has all the same answers to the same questions.
Yes, Deputy City Manager?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the question.
So Councillor Bligh, I wonder if you could reframe that question, please?
Sure. I just wanted to, as a point of procedure, clarify, I wasn't clear as to whether or not staff were going to be reporting out on the various questions that have been posed over the last few days that we have information on, or if you're hoping that councillors are going to assert those questions by asking staff and having the responses read out.
Thank you
one
for that.
by one.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. It's not a regular procedure that we would refer to questions we've been answering by email to council prior to council meetings. So I think it's best if council wants those questions raised in chambers. I defer to the chair, but I'd expect those to be raised in this venue now.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. I'll just clarify that has been my experience in the past on major on big decisions that have garnered a lot of interest and a lot of questions. So, but I'll defer to the chair for that. Thanks.
And just a point of privilege, Chair.
Yes, point of privilege.
Councillor Bligh's time is running under my clock, so I just wanted to note I only had a minute, and I'm not asking more questions, but Councillor Bligh's
Yes,
not
okay,
here.
we'll reset that clock. Thank you. I'll have the clerk do that. Thank you.
May I follow up, Chair, on Councillor Bligh's point of procedure?
Yeah, go ahead.
I also was hoping for that too. I know we've had that in the past where on a significant report, we'll have the staff lead would respond back on the answer to council's questions. And I found it's really helpful to level set for both the public as well as council, because the public are not necessarily receiving those answers, and it can really help to clear up different perceptions around a report. So I would favor that approach as opposed to us going through and randomly re-asking them.
The problem we have, I think, with that is that we, in terms of the procedure of this meeting, council did vote to have a third round of questions. That's what we're in right now. There's not any additional staff presentation. It's just a response to questions, and then we go into debate and decision. So it's not in the agenda, so to speak, and I don't believe staff have come prepared to report back on the many questions that were asked and that they sent out, but that they sent responses to council to. But Deputy City Manager, would you want to respond to that?
Sure, Carr, we'd be happy to review in this venue the questions we've been asked. We responded to 16 questions last night. There was a great number of questions over the last week. The issue would be me quickly gathering them and finding them on my computer, but I'd be happy to, if you let me just grab my computer to go through the 16 from last night as a start.
Okay,
I'm
Madam
happy
Clerk.
to take a 5-minute recess if that's helpful, just to allow staff the time to gather those questions. Chair?
Before we recess, I just want to verify with the clerk the protocol here because this is unusual. We are in a round of questions. So clerk, do we need to have any special motion to enable staff to be able to just report back on the questions that were asked by email? We are going to get potentially a legal opinion on this.
Thank you, Chair Carr. Given that it is unusual, as you have identified, because we're not in a staff presentation to give a summary. However, we are in questions by council, and if one of the questions is to give a summary, then I suppose that could in fact take place, but as the deputy city manager has identified, staff needs some time to organize that.
Okay, so my suggestion is this, that we take a break to enable that. And I suggest that councillors, the way that it would, I think, formally work in this is I intend to cede my 5-minute time to enable staff to answer the questions that I sent in. And I'm not sure if other councillors are willing to do that, but at least that would follow the protocol of a question, an additional third round of questions to
Point of
staff.
order, Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
I'd be willing to put forward a motion to suspend the rules so we could hear a staff report back on the questions before we enter in the remaining time for our questions. So I'm happy to put that forward now. We could still recess and let staff gather the information, and then they could take as long as they want to make that report. And then councillors would still have their questions afterwards if that would work.
Excellent suggestion. So you are moving for
To suspend the rules.
to suspend the procedural rules to enable staff to report back on the questions they received and answers they have prepared to questions up to now. Councillors, any debate on that? Can I just go for yeas and nays? All those in favor say yay.
Yay.
Yeah.
Any opposed say nay. Good, that's unanimous. It would have required a 2/3 vote. So I think that inherent in that, I'm going to seek advice from the clerk, but I don't think I need another motion to hear from staff. I think it was inherent in the question. Or do I need another motion? Great. Okay. So how much time would you like?
We'd appreciate 10 minutes, please.
10 minutes. Okay, there's going to be a 10-minute recess then, or break rather, as staff prepare for that. Great. Thank you for the workaround on that, Mayor Stewart. Hello, Council and everyone. I have just been informed by staff that we need a further 10-minute recess because some of the questions and answers included privileged information, and our legal department needs to review the content of those in order to make sure that that it's appropriate to be able to put them into the public record. So another 10 minutes, everyone. Deputy City Manager, please go ahead.
We very quickly tried to assemble all the answers to councillors' questions we could find. We've been answering councillors' questions on this file for at least a week. I'm going to read to you probably close to 30 questions and answers over the next while, so you'll bear with me if I have a few sips of water along the way. Some of the questions, some of the responses we provided to council are subject to solicitor-client privilege. They have legal advice attached. And so our legal department has given me a list of ones that I will omit on that basis as well. So for the councillors listening, you may not hear your question that you asked answered here in chambers, and that will be the reason why. So with that, I will get going. And okay, so first question. Is all the co-op housing being moved to 6th Avenue in this plan, as some speakers have suggested? Response. For phase 1, the recommended conceptual development plan would result in approximately 700 non-market and co-op units along West 6th Avenue, which is approximately 46% of the total non-market and co-op housing. This figure includes the non-market housing hub, or what's Replan has termed the campus of care. It is contemplated that the other 800 non-market and co-op units contemplated for phase 1 would be integrated throughout the neighborhood. This is about 54% of the total non-market and co-op housing. These include the 2 co-ops that are not intended to be redeveloped as part of phase 1, being Twin Rainbows and Marina Co-op. Many of the units with buildings along many of the units within buildings along West 6th Avenue would not be fronting onto the street, but would be oriented toward the north. It is noted that the plan contemplates calming West 6th Avenue, ideally turning it eventually into a great street. The primary intent of clustering some of the non-market and co-op housing was to allow for residents to directly move into their new homes that are being built on vacant land without the need for an interim housing step, making it both easier for the residents and more financially feasible. That said, the spatial layout of the co-ops and non-market housing would be revisited through the community planning process based on community and stakeholder feedback. Second question. Between these 2 options, to either receive the land, I'm gonna fill in words where they wouldn't be clear otherwise, to receive the conceptual development plan for information or conditionally approve it with amendments, what would be the implications in terms of being able to secure senior government funding commitments for the co-op and non-market housing? And the response is, senior government funds plans over multi-year cycles. The earlier and more concrete a plan we can put forward to a senior government, the better are our chances of securing support for co-op and non-market housing funding packages. Actually securing the funding will depend on the outcome of the regulatory and planning process. The strongest request for funding will be for shovel-ready projects that include estimates for soil remediation, infrastructure upgrading, and the potential share of sea level rise mitigation costs. And then still referencing the question of receiving the plan for information or conditionally approving it with amendments, what would be the implications, if any, for renewal timelines for strata and co-op housing? Oh, sorry, that's one I'm supposed to skip. My apologies. Okay, we're on to question 4 here. How much net green space is added to the Falls Creek South per 1,000 new residents? Is all the berm to be removed? If so, what happens to the waterfall and pedestrian bridge? The ultimate amount of green space for the neighborhood would be determined through the planning process. The conceptual development plan would add approximately 2.2 acres of open space added in phase 1. The current ratio of open space is roughly 465 square feet per unit. The future ratio at phase 1 completion would be approximately 260 square feet per unit. The conceptual plan contemplates a partial removal of the berm east of Willow with the retention of the central part of the berm, including the waterfall and the pedestrian bridge at Laurel. What portion of the 80 acres is included in the conceptual development plan options as evaluated, as some have 1 million more square feet and the same FSR? Response, the FSR varies based on parcels incorporated. The recommended conceptual development plan contemplates the addition of several new land parcels. Next question. How is feasibility testing evaluated if the costs associated with upgrades to 6th Avenue and any costs associated with a potential streetcar or other transit connections have not been included? Response. The preliminary pro formas have been developed to compare high-level options, and there are a number of costs that have not been included in these pro formas. As Council refined any development plan, whether the recommended conceptual development plan or an alternative yet to be developed, substantial financial analysis will be required. Transit costs would be the responsibility of TransLink and or any other entity that were to be granted a concession to operate transit along this corridor. The recommended conceptual development plan has been designed to preserve a transit corridor. Next one, question. What percentage of the properties are to be transferred to the Vancouver Affordable Housing Endowment Fund? Response. Legal ownership of PEF properties has not been transferred to the Vancouver Affordable Housing Endowment Fund, but management and operational responsibility has been. The city is to remain the legal owner on title of these lands. Management responsibility for all 11 properties in Falls Creek South were transferred to the Vancouver Affordable Housing Fund, being 5 co-ops on 7 sites and 4 non-market rental properties. This represents approximately 45% of the city-owned land that is currently leased in Falls Creek South. The final allocation of properties and land between the Property Endowment Fund and the Vancouver Affordable Housing Endowment Fund will be subject to the outcome of a planning and regulatory process and the ultimate development plan that is advanced. Next question. How does this report allow for the formal negotiations concerning the 720 Falls Creek South strata leasehold leases to commence? Response. Staff already has clear direction from Council to initiate formal lease negotiations with the Strata Leasehold Society under a Council-approved framework of terms and conditions. These negotiations are scheduled to commence in early November, and the first meeting has already been scheduled, and will advance independently of the near-term development planning and/or community planning. Okay, next question. Are all the buildings in Falls Creek South in good condition or, at a minimum, have sufficient funds in reserve for the needed renovation and repairs to keep them from going for their, quote, natural life? Answer. This would be part of the next phase of work. The outcome of the regulatory process will further inform the configuration, phasing, and timeline for redevelopment. Building service life of between 40 and 50 years typically requires the largest and most expensive building system renewals, such as HVAC. What does that stand for? It's housing and heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, boilers, and roofing. Just bear with me a sec, please. Yeah, that's that for that one. Okay, moving on to the next one. One speaker asked if we had done an environmental assessment of Falls Creek South. Is the berm all toxic soil, and are there environmental regulations requiring us to clean it up? Response. Historically, because it was an industrial site, it is expected that some site remediation would be required. The amount of remediation would depend upon how much excavation is needed. This will be the subject of further work depending on the outcome of the regulatory process. A high-level provision for these costs has been included in the preliminary financial analysis undertaken to date. The remediation of the berm and any other lands in Falls Creek South would be governed by the provisions of the Environmental Management Act of BC. If the berm contains contaminated soils or other substances, then the development of the berm or the disturbance of the soil within the berm would trigger certain provisions and requirements under the Environmental Management Act. Further testing would be undertaken as part of the development of a more refined set of financial analyses to be undertaken once there is a clearer sense of a development direction. Next one. We did. This is a long question, so bear with me. It's a very long question. A resident sent the following suggestions. Can you tell me if staff has considered or explored the points he makes? So this is all now part of the question. Embodied carbon, demolition of existing buildings and replacement with new buildings, even if these buildings perform to zero carbon performance standards, entails significant GHG emissions from embodied carbon. These are emissions that result primarily from the production of new building materials, though they also include emissions associated with demolition, waste, and construction activities. These emissions can be very significant relative to emissions from building operation and would largely occur in a short period of time before the timeline of the Paris Agreement based on the proposed redevelopment schedule. It is not only quite challenging to achieve big reductions in embodied carbon, but there are also virtually impossible to eliminate. The city has targeted a 40% reduction by 2030. It should also be noted that while co-op buildings in the neighborhood are not built to current energy standards, they are generally electrically heated, meaning they are not on the priority list to eliminate due to fossil fuel heating. Questions to explore could include the following, and now there's 4. What is the net effect of the demolition of existing neighborhood buildings and replacement construction on embodied carbon emissions? What is the optimal timeline for existing building demolition, and how long can the lifespan of these buildings be extended, noting that this will likely vary between the existing enclaves and buildings? Third, how do the proposed building forms, such as smaller buildings versus larger towers, impact embodied carbon, noting that towers typically rely heavily on structural concrete and steel, typically higher embodied carbon? There are other possible issues to consider as well, such as how siting of buildings affects rainwater management and existing established trees and biodiversity that have been established over the last 40 years. The response to that question that staff has provided says that environmental implications will be an important variable in refining and evaluating the conceptual development plan through the next phases of the process. And questions such as these presented will be included in these analyses. So that is one set of questions, and I'm just going to now go to the next one. These are now 5 questions. The questions are quite long. So first question. Oh, I see. Oh, so this set of questions, a former city employee, Cameron Gray, delivered some thoughts to council a few days ago on the Falls Creek South Conceptual Development Plan. And one of the councillors took excerpts from Mr. Gray's document and quoted them here and then asked staff to respond to them. So the first question. Sorry, let me make it a bit bigger. There we go. The focus of the first phase of development is on the city land south of Commodore and east of Moberly makes sense. And it would be a good test of the 1/3 strata leasehold, 1/3 market rental, and 1/3 housing mix. Rather than doing one big plan for the whole of the city's Falls Creek South lands, the city should concentrate its resources on developing a well thought out plan for this long vacant property. So I guess it's not so much a question as an assertion. Staff's response. Council could opt only to develop the vacant property in Falls Creek South. As a starting point, this would be a significant deviation from the recommended conceptual development plan currently before council and would significantly reduce the opportunity to increase the supply of housing of all types. For example, if the redevelopment of large co-op and non-market sites are not included in phase 1. In future, it will be more difficult for existing co-op and non-market residents to move seamlessly into new accommodation in Falls Creek South without coordination between these lease expiries and the availability of new housing created on currently vacant or underutilized land. Second excerpt from Mr. Gray's report. The staff report does not evaluate an incremental development option that would make use of the existing development, the strata and non-market residential buildings in particular. Excuse me. Instead, it proposes the wholesale redevelopment of the non-market housing by 2040, followed by the wholesale redevelopment of the leasehold strata. This is unfortunate as an incremental option, which would provide for redevelopment to occur over time, and site by site may well be financially superior. As the report notes, substantial financial costs were not included in the pro forma, some of which could be avoided or delayed if a more incremental approach to the redevelopment of the city's Falls Creek South lands were taken. A substantial increase in the number of housing units would be achieved over time, and in the meantime, the city would be collecting land rent from its market and non-market lessees. Staff response. The recommended conceptual development plan is designed as a starting point for a plan that would optimize the use of the full approximately 80 acres of city's land of city stewarded land in Falls Creek South. If the large co-op and non-market sites are not included in Phase 1, the opportunity to increase the supply of housing of all types is substantially reduced, and the opportunity to create a holistic multi-decade plan for the future of Falls Creek South would be foregone. In future, it would be more difficult for existing co-op and non-market housing residents to move seamlessly into new accommodation in Falls Creek South without coordination between these lease expiries and the availability of new housing created on currently vacant or underutilized land. Developing only the vacant lands would avoid or postpone some of the costs associated, for example, with soil remediation, sea level rise mitigation, amenities and infrastructure, but would also preclude the opportunity to create a single holistic multi-decade development plan that could generate sufficient funding to support the amenities, infrastructure, climate mitigation measures, public works, and transportation infrastructure to serve this community over the coming decades. Third excerpt from Mr. Gray's report. Given that most of the nonprofit rental and the cooperative housing is on the city's Falls Creek South lands is to be demolished, requiring new non-market housing to be built in advance, federal and provincial funding for several hundred units would be required by 2028. Will it be available? Will it provide the same level of affordability as the non-market housing that is there now? Will it accommodate families? New non-market housing, especially family housing, is expensive to build and shown by the recent report on the Cole Harbour School/childcare/non-market housing project. Before much work is done to transform the recommended option into a development plan, the city needs to confirm that the federal and provincial funding required will be available when needed. Staff response. If Council instructs staff to advance work on the recommended conceptual development plan, it will be a priority of the GM of Arts, Culture and Community Services, the CEO of the Vancouver Affordable Housing Agency, and the GM of Real Estate and Facilities Management to enter these discussions with the appropriate senior government and other funding partners concerning funding for future affordable housing. The staff team has already initiated these conversations with BC Housing. Fourth excerpt from Mr. Gray's report. Related but separate are the competing demands in the city for non-market housing funding. Replacing the single-room occupancy hotels in the downtown east side with self-contained non-market housing is a city priority. So is replacing the temporary modular housing, much of which occupies underdeveloped sites, for example, Main and Terminal and Princess and Powell, or must be redeveloped to make room for private development such as Heather and 35th, not to mention the modular housing at the north end of Ash, which would have to be redeveloped as part of the proposed Falls Creek South redevelopment. Then there is the need to fund the non-market housing on the city's remaining Southeast Falls Creek lands, the 600 units set aside for the non-market housing in the Concord Pacific Place and projects elsewhere in the city. The city will have to prioritize its non-market housing needs. Federal and provincial funding for non-market housing is limited, has been since Falls Creek South was built, and there is no reason to expect that this unfortunate situation to change in light of federal and provincial debt loads incurred in response to the pandemic. I presume it's the pandemic. The last word is cut off. Staff response. There are affordable housing needs in many Vancouver neighborhoods, and the city has a track record of securing hundreds of millions of dollars over the recent years for affordable housing from senior governments. Senior governments are well positioned to fund large programs such as would be Falls Creek South, as they can be advanced in a more predictable, plannable way than one-off projects can be. If Council instructs staff to advance work on the recommended conceptual development plan, it will be a priority of the GM of Arts, Culture and Community Services, the CEO of the Vancouver Affordable Housing Authority, and the GM of Real Estate and Facilities Management to enter into these discussions with the appropriate senior governments and other funding partners concerning funding affordable housing. The staff team has already initiated these conversations with BC Housing. Thanks very much. And here is the last excerpt from Mr. Gray's report or letter to Council. Has the city tried to negotiate with the feds and the province for funding for the Falls Creek South housing as an entire portfolio, or is that something that would be done after there is a plan? Response. This is work that would be undertaken after Council has given the GM of real estate direction to advance the recommended conceptual development plan as a starting point for an application to the GM of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability for a community planning process. Senior governments are well positioned to fund large programs, such as would be Falls Creek South, as these can be advanced in a more predictable, plannable way than can be one-off projects. Okay, that is our second set. Moving along. First, another question. Why is the plan to redevelop the co-ops before the stratas? One answer I got to this was that because it's what the strata folks want, but the co-ops would also like to take a while before redeveloping. Response. There would be a significant time before co-op sites would be redeveloped at the end of their current leases between 2036 and 2039. Prior to redevelopment, the GM of planning process would need to be completed. The city and co-ops would have to enter into formal collaborative discussion, and funding for redevelopment would need to be secured from senior governments and/or other third-party partners. There are a number of reasons the recommended conceptual development plan contemplated redevelopment of co-op sites as part of Phase 1. First, a number of the Falls Creek South co-op and non-market housing parcels are large in area but low in density. For example, the townhouses are less than 1 FSR. By contemplating redevelopment, there's an opportunity to increase the number of overall co-op units in Falls Creek South that could accommodate more people within a range of incomes. Second reason, in some cases, the building form of the Falls Creek South co-ops are not suitable for aging in place. For example, townhouse forms with stairs but without elevators. And some of these buildings will require significant investments to maintain over the coming years. Building new homes for the existing co-ops at their lease ends would address these challenges. Third reason, co-op and nonprofit operators each have a single lease per building with the city, as compared to the strata leasehold, for which each unit has a separate lease with the city, and there are no lease end costs associated with co-op and non-market housing tenancies. These factors make it significantly easier to coordinate and collaborate with co-ops to advance a phased redevelopment plan. And the last point to this question, another important consideration incorporated into the design of the recommended conceptual development plan is the opportunity for co-op residents to move directly from their existing homes into new co-op units without the need for interim accommodation. Next question. Which co-ops have been notified that the city wants to renegotiate or redevelop? Staff response. Oh, I responded here that we responded elsewhere, so just I'll get to that question eventually, but I don't have it right in front of me. Next question. This is city-owned land. All the nonprofit housing experts tell us that to get affordable housing, given construction and other costs, you will have to have the land already. Yet the plan is to reduce the percentage of co-op and nonprofit housing. Shouldn't we be using the fact that we own land to create more affordability? Given the lack of new affordable units in the city, shouldn't that be a priority when we own the land rather than the number of units? Shouldn't we at least be trying for the original goal of one-third low, one-third middle, and one-third high income? Staff response. It is noted that in the absence of widespread income testing, a mix of tenancy types would have to serve as a proxy for the income targets mentioned above. The mixed income nature of Falls Creek South is a foundational assumption of the recommended conceptual development plan, which has aimed to significantly increase the number of non-market housing and co-op units in Falls Creek South, as shown in Table 5 of next week's Council report. The existing Falls Creek South unit mix contains 56% co-op and non-market housing and 8% secured rental housing. Phase 1 of the recommended conceptual development plan contemplates a mix of roughly 40% co-op and non-market, 24% secured rental, and 36% strata leasehold. Phase 2 would contemplate an ultimate mix of 35% co-op and non-market, 30% rental, and 35% strata leasehold. This would result in roughly 470 incremental co-op and non-market housing units as compared to the current figures at the end of phase 1, representing a 45% increase, and roughly 1,200 more units than are currently, in brackets, a 120% increase. It's anticipated that this mix of tenancy types would be refined and adjusted through the GM of Planning's community planning process, which would involve extensive community and stakeholder consultation. As a result of this process, it may be determined that a greater proportion of non-market and co-op housing could be included in the plans for future development or redevelopment of Falls Creek South, noting that the development or redevelopment of co-ops and non-market housing would require substantial funding from senior governments and or other third-party funders. Last question in this set. The new concept seems to have strata and market closer to the water, brackets more desirable, while co-ops and non-market are pushed to the edge by 6th Avenue. Isn't this in violation of the old Falls Creek South principle that you shouldn't be able to tell the difference between housing for the rich and housing for the poor? Staff response. Excuse me one sec. Consistent with Replan's July 2020 proposal, the recommended conceptual development plan contemplates beginning a decades-long redevelopment by starting with the vacant and underutilized sites, the largest of which is at the Olympic Village Canada Line Station site. The envisioned first moves of phase 1 would be to develop new long-term replacement co-op and nonprofit housing sites, which would allow those people living in existing co-ops and non-market housing buildings to move into their new homes without having to move into an interim home, thereby moving twice. Phase 2 contemplates the redevelopment of the 12 strata leasehold parcels upon termination of these leases, with each redeveloped parcel to have a mix of housing types that would include co-op and non-market, secured rental, and strata leasehold. Okay, 2 more sets to go. The original objective for Falls Creek South was for the residents to be 1/3 low income, 1/3 middle, and 1/3 richer. What is the anticipated proportion of low, middle, and richer within the staff's new vision? Staff response. The recommended conceptual development plan is intended to approach these targets: 1/3 lower income, and then represented in non-market housing and co-ops; 1/3 middle income, mostly represented in purpose-built rental, with a specific mix of market and affordable rents. Specifics would be determined through the community planning process; and then 1/3 higher income, represented by the tenancies of strata leasehold and full market rental. While the conceptual plan contemplates a reduction in the proportion of co-op units, this is intended to be offset by the introduction of more affordable rental units into the mix. It's anticipated that the specifics of the more precise share of non-market co-op and affordable rental would be developed through the GM of Planning-led, the Director of Planning-led community planning process. Next question. The CCPA says that we can build housing that rents for $1,300 a month for a 1-bedroom if we already have the land. This can be leveraged so some people pay less than that and some people more. Why don't we develop a Falls Creek plan that uses this premise to make 100% of the housing affordable in this way, rather than having market and rental strata at all? Staff response. Staff has not yet had the opportunity to undertake a detailed analysis of the CCPA report the questioner refers to. That said, based upon a high-level scan of the report, it appears that its conclusions are based on a number of assumptions that derive the rent figures noted in the question. These assumptions would not necessarily hold up in a large-scale redevelopment and are best applied for individual or standalone projects within developed communities. Furthermore, some assumptions are not clear or are inconsistent with the current costs of construction. That aside, the mixed income nature of Falls Creek South is a foundational assumption in the recommended conceptual development plan, which has aimed to significantly increase the number of non-market housing, co-op, and affordable rental units in Falls Creek South, as shown in Table 5 of this week's Council report. It's anticipated that this mix of tenancy types would be refined and adjusted through the GM of Planning's community planning process, which would involve extensive community and stakeholder consultation. As a result of this process, it may be determined that a greater proportion of non-market and co-op housing be included in the plans for future development and/or redevelopment of Falls Creek South, noting that the development and/or redevelopment of co-ops and non-market housing would require substantial funding from senior governments and/or other third-party partners. According to council direction, the GM of Real Estate, the GM of Arts, Culture and Community Centre, and the GM of Planning will work to optimize the number of affordable housing units in any future Falls Creek South development and/or redevelopment plans. Next question. How much of, just checking my battery, how much of the land between the Canby Bridge and Olympic Village does the city own? And what is the state of planning for this parcel? And is there a good reason to plan for it separately from Falls Creek South? How much is housing affordability a goal for planning on this site? Staff response. The city owns all the land located between the Canby Bridge and the Olympic Village, located between First Avenue and Falls Creek. These lands are held in the Property Endowment Fund. Southeast Falls Creek 1A is the name of this parcel. Total area is approximately 10 hectares, and approximately half of this is parks and open space. These two projects are each large and complex redevelopment These two projects are each large and complex redevelopment projects in their own right. Southeast Falls Creek 1A already has an approved official development plan and public benefit strategy in place in accordance with the Southeast Falls Creek neighborhood. These two neighborhoods, while adjacent, are governed by two different regulatory plans. These plans could be merged with council approval. Falls Creek South and Southeast Falls Creek 1A are two distinct neighborhoods that require a different planning approach and are advancing on substantially different timelines. Staff recommends that Southeast Falls Creek 1A and Falls Creek South planning be kept distinct, with the latter still having to go through a major planning exercise that may lead to the amendment of the Falls Creek South official development plan with a set of public benefit requirements that meets the needs of that neighborhood. The two projects are on different timelines, with Falls Creek South project being significantly more complex. Last question of this set. On the closer horizon, the GM of Real Estate will seek to enter into formal negotiations concerning the approximately 720 Falls Creek South strata leasehold leases in the coming weeks. The GM of Arts, Culture and Community Services will also be entering into formal discussions with the Falls Creek South co-ops and nonprofit housing operators concerning either lease extensions or, for high potential redevelopment sites, potential redevelopment planning. That's a quote from the council report that's before council. The question, does this mean that these lease extensions discussions will start happening regardless of the outcome of the report recommendations, or only if the recommendations are accepted? Response. Yes, council has already provided direction to the GM of Real Estate to negotiate strata leasehold leases, and has provided direction to the GM of Arts, Culture and Community Center Services to enter into lease and or redevelopment discussions with the Falls Creek South co-ops. That's the end of that set, and we are down to the final set. And it's just, oh, no, actually, I already read this to you. That, Chair Carr, is the end. Now, I just will say, I can't guarantee that we got to all the questions we've answered because we only had about 15 minutes to gather up what we could find, but that is certainly, I would say, the majority of the questions we answered by far.
Well done. I think that councillors who may not have heard their question may get on the queue to ask it. If they're, yeah, so we can proceed, I think, in that way. So as far as you're concerned, you may want to stay there because there may be questions coming to you, but and you've got your team there, but I'm going to move to councillors' questions now.
Thank you.
So on the queue, Councillor DeGenova, your timer had been going when the first points
I'm
of order.
good right now.
You're good for right now?
Well, yes, I had asked a question. I think my clock kept running, but I'm fine.
Councillor DeGenova, I was just going to explain to you that we know that your clock was running and that you have somewhere around 2.5 to 3 minutes left. 2.5 to 3 minutes. I can give you the benefit of the doubt for 3 minutes if you have more questions.
No, but I can't take myself off the queue, is what I was trying to say to
Oh,
you.
you want to, okay, you don't want them right now. Okay, that's fine.
No. Yeah.
No problem. Mayor Stewart, over to you. This is a 5-minute, it's 5 minutes to ask questions to council, sorry, from council to staff, just so everyone's.
Great. Thanks so much, Chair Carr, and thanks again for your chairing. This has been a marathon for sure, and with more time to go. So my question to staff is a bit high level. The process by which we've been exploring fault changes in Falls Creek is to first have a proposal from RAFM, the real estate department, bring it through council. Council hears from the public. There's a vote, and then it moves to planning. I'm just wondering why that was the approach we followed in this case.
Thank you for the question. There's a couple of reasons we've done it this way, recognizing that all the ways we could have approached this were imperfect for various reasons. Several of the speakers before council the last few days talked about planning by spreadsheet, and while staff fully appreciates there's a lot of people living in the community that have a lot of passion and desires for the community, financial feasibility is something we have to think about as well. So we wanted to start with sort of understanding with some bookends of what might be possible in the community. And that is one reason we started with a landowner plan before just taking it to public consultation through a planning process. The other important reason is that the people living on city land in Falls Creek South very understandably want clarity around their lease ends. And it was staff's thinking, and we've brought council along all the way through this process, that if we could start to think about possibilities for the shape of what development and redevelopment could look like, we could with confidence start to think about which leases could be extended by how much, just before we just embarked on that process.
Okay, thanks. So is this an unusual approach? I mean, when the city owns a piece of land, say it's not Falls Creek, somewhere else in the city, would we typically start with kind of an assessment with our landowner's hat on, make a decision, and then move to a regulatory, using a regulatory hat in the next stage? Is that kind of a typical way that we approach something like this?
I'm going to answer partially and then ask Mr. Nick Kassam to round out what I say. It is a typical approach, both for the city and also for any private developer that would start kind of percolating and thinking about conceptual plans, and then bring it to the GM of planning and start having pre-application discussions. Normally that would go on without any consultation in the public. One of the challenging parts of this process is that we've brought this so early to the public without having really had any discussions of any substance with the general manager of planning. Nick, do you have anything to add to that?
I think you've covered it, Karen. I think the only thing I would add that's also standard practice for private landowners to do that, and examples would be Northeast Falls Creek or EFL, and we've done it as well with our own developments such as Granville Bridge North, sorry, the north loops of Granville Bridge.
Okay, right. So it did seem, as I listened to the dozens and dozens of folks who were talking about this process, there did seem to be some confusion about really the two roles of council here. One, councillors with a landowner hat on, which occurs when we own property that could be changed, and second is the council with the regulatory hat on, and both of these, perhaps this is the final question. What is the legal side of these separations? Like why do we often talk about us having these two hats? Is there a quick way that you can explain that?
Thanks for the question. I'm going to ask Jeff Greenberg from our law department to answer that one. Jeff, you could take your mask off. Thanks.
Yes, Mayor Stewart. The difference in the roles is, of course, we have business interests as a landowner in the city, and council also has the regulatory role in zoning land in the city, which you do when you have public hearings. And the distinction, obviously, is that when you're exercising your business authority, You have to keep that distinct from when you're exercising your regulatory authority. So when we have a public hearing, you are coming into public hearings with open minds and with an unbiased perspective. And that is the role which council does. And so what we intend to do is to always keep that open and unbiased mind open for when you are exercising your regulatory authority.
Okay, and these are defined in the charter or elsewhere?
That,
These
yes,
two rules.
that is it for your timing, Mayor Stewart.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks, Chair Carr. I was prepared to move the report and then move an amendment, and it's my understanding that Councillor Kirby Young and Councillor DeGenova on the list don't have questions either, but are on the list for amendments after that.
Go ahead. You have the floor.
Okay.
But
Thanks.
just one
So
second. I'm just, you're intending to move it. I'm going to move us to the main queue then.
Okay.
Pardon me? Oh, sorry, I'm just. Oh, she moved them. She said she was going to, and I'm moving her. Sorry. Sorry, I was just conferring with the clerk about that because we are now in the main queue. So Councillor Boyle, I am putting you there, and go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Chair Carr. So I will move the recommendations, and then I'd like to move an amendment, which I've circulated to all of council.
Okay. If you're intending to do that, I'm moving you to an amendment
Great.
queue.
Thank you very much.
Just one second, and go ahead. There you go.
Great. Thank you, Chair Carr. I have had many conversations over the past week with residents and with my council colleagues working on an approach to move forward here. And the amendment that I am proposing is a result of those conversations and a result of the huge amount of feedback that residents have provided in speaking and in emails and more, and the sincere and collaborative engagement of council and of staff. So the amendment is to receive this report for information and then to provide some high-level direction to move into a public planning process. That direction includes maintaining the original neighborhood income split of 1/3 lower income, 1/3 middle income, and 1/3 upper income. It includes addressing community concerns that we've heard around how new co-op and non-market housing is spaced around the neighborhood, and utilizing existing co-op and non-market housing for as long as is possible, informed by the community planning process. And I just want to reiterate that this has been a real team effort. This council knew when we were elected that this would be one of the big and complex decisions on our plate, and it has been that for residents and for council and for staff. And so I just wanted to say, so that the public hears, that on this topic, I have seen council across the board listening sincerely and working collaboratively to get a good outcome here. And I'm hopeful that this amendment will help address resident concerns and move us into a good planning process together.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Boyle. To the amendment, Councillor DeGenova.
Thanks very much. I'm happy to support the amendment, and I think that this reflects some of the work and collaboration, not just of this council, and appreciate Councillor Boyle putting this forward, but also of Replan. And you know, although we all, many of us have been working with the community, listening to the community for several years. Some of us, you know, over more than just this term. And you know, to hear what they want, what their concerns are, and their fears about their home. Um, you know, certainly I think that this reflects the pieces that they would like to see in working collaboratively together as partners. So I'm happy to support this, and I think that this also will add some comfort to the process moving forward, as it will not only receive it for information, but also have some consideration by planning, and also just underscore and highlight some of the other points that you know, to some of the questions may happen in the future, but this gives staff certainty and future councils certainty that this is the direction that our council went after hearing from the many speakers from False Creek Sound. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor DeGenova. To the amendment, Councillor Hardwick.
Yes, I am going to speak in support of the amendment. It's been an interesting and challenging process, but ultimately the fact that we will be receiving this for information and then involving the planning department, I think is essential for us to move forward. Of all of the different solutions that we've been exploring, I think settling on this one is the best position for us at this time, and therefore I will support.
Thank you, Councillor Hardwick. Councillor Fry to the amendment.
Yeah, thanks. Also speaking in support of the amendment and appreciative of Councillor Boyle bringing it forward and acknowledging the significant amount of work that's been going on with this council to land on this, and it's been a real challenge. But I also just want to really take a moment to highlight and appreciate the contribution of the team at the city manager's office, or deputy city manager's office, and REFM. I think, you know, this may not have landed in the place that the public wanted to see, but I really do appreciate that it's important work, and I think that there is sort of a baseline that's established here, a fiduciary responsibility. We need to go into this work with a you know, a thoughtful consideration of what this land is worth, what it could be worth, what the valuation could be, and recognizing that at the end of the day, this is city-owned land, and we have a responsibility to the people of Vancouver and the future population of Vancouver to steward this land appropriately, and to make sure that as we are moving forward, we are considering the options with a thoughtful thoughtful overview and perspective. And I do appreciate that the work that our team was tasked to do was work that they were tasked to do by previous councils and by this council, and they did a fine job of it. And I do want to thank them for that work, because I know it's a lot of work, and at times some of the conversations kind of veered to somewhat personalized towards our staff, and I think that was an unfortunate. I recognize that it's a stressful time for folks who live there, but I just really want to highlight that there's a lot of really important work and good work that went on by our staff here. That being said, I'm going to support the amendment as we've put forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. Councillor Swanson to the amendment.
Yeah, I'd like to thank the staff too. I'm supporting the amendment. I was one of the people that helped work on it. I think it's got 4 important parts to it. One is that the REFM report is being received for information. 2 is that we're sticking with the 1/3 low income, 1/3 middle income, 1/3 high income. 3 is that there's no poor area, and 4 is to maintain the existing non-market housing as long as possible. I think those are all really important, and I hope the amendment passes.
Thank you, Councillor Swanson. Councillor Kirby Young.
Yeah, thank you. I'll also speak in support of this, and I appreciated the opportunity to discuss this and sort of work through it with council. I think I heard a number of different things in the process, and I will say that I think council committed and staff were responding to a desire to try to bring as much information forward as transparently, I should say, and as early as possible. And by definition, the conceptual plan that we were presented with was just that, it's conceptual, and therefore it was high level, and therefore doesn't have the level of detail that would provide answer a lot of the questions that community members naturally had when you're speaking about something as, you know, sort of fundamentally personal as people's homes. But I will say that I heard a lot of questions or fears, and I hope some of those got answered during the process, such as the importance of a community planning process. I heard one or two speakers say, okay, that's good, it will go to a community planning process. I didn't realize that. What a community planning process would actually do, that this is conceptual in terms of the economic basis for a plan, but a community planning process provides the community the ability to talk about things like building typology, to talk about things like the location of those buildings and where they go. I'll also think that too, there's some good foundational blocks here where there's actually a lot of alignment between what we heard from community and the plan was presented to staff. And those were really important principles from my perspective, which were no displacement. Nobody is displaced out of the community. Building on the original tenets and principles of that community in terms of a green and very livable one. Increasing number of housing. You know, these are all the points of alignment that I heard. I heard concerns about sort of lack of information and concerns about really legitimate ones. But I kind of want to set the stage for a positive community engagement process, which was about building more housing, welcoming neighbors, which is about building on the strength of the community in terms of not, and trying to overcome that very natural concern and legitimate one around not feeling the neighborhood's being torn down, but it's being built upon in a positive way in terms of the integration of income types, the integration of types of typology, and this sense of community that has been built there, because that's the number one thing that I think we heard from everybody. It's not about the buildings, it's about the people that inhabit them and the relationships between them. So I think that, you know, I would say what I heard other than concerns was also a lot of alignment, and I think a really good foundation for a community planning discussion. And I'm happy to support that, and I appreciate the opportunity for council to have come together and try to synthesize what we heard from the community. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Kirby Young. Mayor Stewart.
Yes, I'd like to thank Councillor Boyle for bringing this forward and for all the work of council on this, as well as all the folks who came in to talk during this process. And I think this takes us to a good spot where we've really draw a line under step one, which is to get this discussion into the public, to have a real, for council to make a first decision, which I hope will happen today, and then to move on to step two. So this high level conceptual discussion, the initial discussion with the community has happened now. And I think, as we know, sitting through many hours of folks talking about how important this area is to them and to future generations, I think was an excellent start. Also in this amendment is the commitment to a third principle, which I think I deeply support, and I'm glad this is being embraced by the community and also being expressed so explicitly in this amendment. So I think this is a very good amendment. It moves us very nicely to step two from a process led by the real estate department, which was necessary, to now a second step, which will be led by the planning department. So again, deeply appreciative for the effort that Councillor Boyle has made here, and will support this. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Stewart. Okay, I'm assuming that you are somehow on the list again. I don't see anyone else on the list to speak to this. So clerk, could you move us to a vote on this amendment? I'm not, yes, I do. If not, I'm not getting a voting screen for myself. In favor. And that has passed unanimously, Council. Great. Back to the main queue. Councillor Boyle, did you have anything else that you wanted to add at this point?
No, Chair Carr, thanks. I'll go back on for a few comments later on, but
Great.
I'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much.
Great, good, thank you. Councillor Kirby Young?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Carr. I also have an amendment if you want to move us to an amendment queue.
I will. I'll put you on. Just 1 second. Yes, go ahead with your amendment.
Great, thank you. It's been circulated to council and I think should come up. I'm not seeing on screen in the chambers, but I'm sure that will be coming up shortly. Yep, okay, great. So the public can see it. So there's 5 components to this amendment, and for the interest of efficiency, I'm going to, and because it's been circulated to council ahead of time, I'm going to try to move it as one amendment. I'll go through the pieces, perhaps not word for word, but just hitting on the highlights of each tenet. The First Amendment really emphasizes that council supports the goal of working with the nonprofit sector to develop and deliver all forms of housing tenure on the False Creek South site, with the aim of maximizing affordability and deepening it over time, and directs the GM of Real Estate and Facilities Management to explore the feasibility of this approach and report back to council, and further that such exploration include consultation with the nonprofit sector. So that piece really speaks to the desire to maximize nonprofit involvement on the site where possible. The second piece and second of it is really embracing the original vision of False Creek, which is a very green and livable community. And as our city does grow and has densified, that green space becomes incredibly ever more important. And I think we've seen the impact of that on health and mental health and physical well-being during COVID. And so the second piece is about council supporting a goal that Charleston Park be designated as a permanent public park upon completion of the land use plan in order to ensure a green and livable community. And that's the essence of the second piece. The third piece really talks about asking the GM for Planning, Design, and Sustainability and REFM to incorporate consideration of pollution mitigation measures in building design features and siting strategies to support healthy homes, and specifically for buildings that may be located on the southern edges of the area. The fourth piece is with respect to consideration and exploration of the use of swing siting and accommodation that would give residents the opportunity to return to new homes in their original area within the False Creek South community where possible and feasible. So it's an ask for an exploration of that. And the fifth and final piece is asking staff to work in collaboration with the Squamish Nation, the Sanok Partnership, and TransLink to explore and advance a case for a transit service that would connect Olympic Village to the renewed False Creek South neighborhood, the Molson site, and to Sanok, building off the current City of Vancouver streetcar policy. And that, again, in terms of supporting green and livable communities, is around building upon the very broad vision that our previous incumbents, planners, and council and the community took to ensure sort of a complete community. And so those are the 5 pieces in summary of the amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Yung. And we have Mayor Stewart to speak to the amendment. Go ahead, Mayor Stewart.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to congratulate Councillor Kirby-Yung on what I think is a solid amendment. What I really like about this is it does keep us moving to step 2. It again moves this from the hands of real estate, who have done a very good job in this case to start the conversation, incorporates a lot of what we've heard from the dozens of people that have come forward to speak about the community that they love. And I think it's very forward-looking because it looks at connecting this community with other communities that are now under development, including Sanok and perhaps a Molson site. So happy to support this and thank the councillor for bringing it forward.
Thanks, Mayor Stewart. Councillor DiGenova to the amendment.
Thanks so much. I just had a point of information for staff on a portion of this amendment.
Yeah, you can speak it, and staff are here. So
thanks so much. You have to ask the chair if I can do that first. So my point of information is regarding Charleston Park and the amendment in front of us. Is this language in any way fettering Park Board, or have we consulted with Park Board about this? Would there be any surprises to them here, or could we expect feedback that in any way was different than the direction council may choose to move forward in? Here, just trying to respect the partner organizations and other governance bodies we work with.
Yep, that's a point of information I'll direct to the deputy city manager.
Thank you. Through the chair, the GM of the Park Board did review this amendment, which was submitted to staff for feedback prior to being brought onto the floor, and she was in support of it. The elected Park Board would not have seen it yet, and I'm just going to ask Jeff Greenberg from our law department to comment on the feathering part of the question.
Yes, Chair and Council. The wording of this amendment has been crafted specifically to avoid any such fettering. What it says is that it's supporting the goal of doing this. It is premature to do the designation at this time in any event because the exact boundaries of the park have not been determined. What area precisely will be park, again, is going to be subject of the community planning process. So this is quite rightly not fettering that discretion and has been worded in a correct manner by the councillor to avoid that.
Thanks very much. And with that being said, just as a former park board commissioner, I very much respect that, and respect the opportunity for a board to get the opportunity to see and communicate with council before we make decisions that impact them and vice versa. So I will be supporting this. Certainly, I just had that one question, but I think that in considering my background, coming with experience from the non-market and nonprofit housing sector, it's really important to include nonprofits. We've heard from many people, including Tom Armstrong and Jill Ackey, and we see the value that nonprofits can bring either in partnership or sometimes they're able to do it by themselves. But I also think that this could be a component that adds to the value of possibly planning this community in ways that we haven't thought of, because the nonprofit sector often very creative that way and is able to come up with creative funding models as well. So happy to support this and appreciate my colleague putting this forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor DiGenova. Councillor Wee, to the amendment.
Yeah, I'll also be supportive, and I really appreciate the integrated transportation options. That was one of our council priorities on this project, and so I'd like to see elements of what we've kind of been talking about showcased here and gives direction for staff. So I will be supportive of it all.
Great, thank you. And I do not see any other councillors on the queue, so clerk, if you could take us to a vote, please. And that passes unanimously. Great. Moving back to the main queue, Councillor Kirby Young, do you have anything else that you?
Not at this time, thanks, Chair.
Great. Councillor DiGenova, to the motion.
Thanks very much. I have an amendment that I'd like to propose to the amended motion. And I'd sent that into the clerks, and simply, council, I had asked staff for some advice on how to word this, but I went back to the May 30th, 2017 council minutes, and that was the time where councillors Affleck and Reimer were appointed liaisons to the to the False Creek South Plan and the planning process, and considering the engagement and the I have to say not only the engagement but the time that Replan and others and staff have spent on this, and understanding and appreciating the deputy city manager answered the question as to the role that liaisons played, but I know that it was helpful for me that we did have liaisons that also I think demonstrates that council is at the table even when all 11 of us can't be because we can't meet and form more than quorum. But just as we have liaisons to other committees such as the Planning Commission and our civic advisory committees, I think that this is really important also. It's not something that continued on specifically this term and that council members were appointed to, but there were a couple of council members, I thought, in the interest of being efficient with time. Councillor Hardwick certainly has made it very clear, not only in the time that she's spent on this, but her passion. And Councillor Fry, I appreciated that he also had stepped up and brought together a number of different councillors. I think that there's, some balance and perspective there, and I just wanted to explain why I thought that might those council liaisons may be a good fit. And I will let you know that I've asked both of them, and both of them had said that they were fine to move ahead with that and stand for these positions if council did approve this. Also have added that the scope and responsibilities would come back to council, so we would understand exactly what it was that they would be doing in their liaison roles and positions.
Great,
And
thank you.
happy to take any questions also, just through points of information
Great,
if you have any.
Thank you. Council, I failed to move us to an amendment queue. And I know that Mayor Stewart, there you go. You were on, I believe, to speak to the amendment. So I'll advance you to do that. To the amendment, Mayor Stewart.
Thanks very much. I just have a point of information to perhaps staff, probably legal staff. That's okay with you, Chair?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Great. I'm wondering if this would any way preclude councillors from voting on any aspects of this plan for future votes. So because they're appointed as liaison, I just think if we'll have public hearings connected with the rezoning of Falls Creek, just wondering if perhaps they might want to be made aware if having these positions would in any way disqualify them for voting on, say, a rezoning.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Stewart and Council. At this point, I would say it is too early in the process to determine that, which is why Councillor Dijanova's second part of her amendment is important in terms of defining the scope and role of the councillor liaisons. There are alternative approaches, I guess I could suggest, in terms of doing that first and then appointing secondarily. But I understand Councillor Dijanova's intent, and we will have to deal with it through scope and role in order to preserve, obviously, the open-mindedness and independence of those councillors. And then they can make the determination as to what they do and what they don't do.
Great, thanks so much. I'll support this amendment then. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Stewart. Thanks, staff. Councillor Dijanova, you're on this queue again.
Oh, I put myself back on when you told me we hadn't moved to an amendment queue. So you can take me off the queue for now. Thank you.
Councillor Bligh to the amendment.
Thanks very much. I just have a question considering this planning effort is going to go beyond October 2022. And the way I read this amendment is that it's appointing Councillors Fry and Hardwick as council liaisons. So would it be the assumption that in the event that Councillor Fry and Councillor Hardwick are not on council after November 2022, that this amendment would be null and void, or would that be an empty, 2 empty seats that would have to be filled? And follow up to that is, would this fall under the nomination subcommittee to manage, as we do appoint council liaisons to all the other committees, almost all the other committees. So just want to follow that up before we make a decision on this.
Yep. Deputy City Manager.
Wording that would either end this at the end of this term's council, or to leave wording in there that would allow the future council to appoint new liaison to it. It's a little bit different, I think, than other types of appointments to committees, because this isn't a committee or an entity that these people are being appointed to, and that's where I would ask Jeff Greenberg to weigh in.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yes, I think it would be wise to include that additional language, but clearly the end of the term will determine whether or not Councillor Fry and Hardwick would remain as liaisons by virtue of voting. I guess that is one of the reasons why staff might have suggested doing the scope and the terms first, and then coming up with the recommendation for who's appointed. But I cannot say that this is unlawful in this way. It's just we're going to have to reverse some of the order of things.
Okay. Councillor Bligh, does that satisfy you in terms of your question?
Yeah, it does. So, but if I can just repeat back what I've heard is that in essentially when this term is over, there'll have to be some sort of action to ensure that these positions would be filled by either Councillor Brian, Councillor Hardwick, or other council liaisons. Is that correct?
Yes, Councillor Bligh, I think you could add clarifying language if you so chose, but it seems clear from the amendment that the councillors are being appointed in their capacity as councillors, and as such, when the terms are over, if persons were no longer councillors, then council would need to revisit who the liaisons are. And I think that there will be an opportunity based upon Councillor DiGenova's amendment to report back in any event based upon the scope and the role, and perhaps further clarity could again be added there. But keep in mind, staff didn't evaluate this amendment in advance, so we are working in real time to work with the amendment.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great. I'll just see the rest of my time. I'm not super clear on the amendment, but I don't not support it. I'm just going to hear from others and then make that decision.
Thank you. Council, before moving on to Councillor Kirby Young, we are approaching 5 o'clock and I would need a motion for us to extend past 5. And I see Councillor Kirby Young's hand up on this.
I was going to ask to do that, so thank you, Councillor Carr, that before move to extend to complete the business.
Okay, that motion is on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone in favor? Sorry, anyone opposed say nay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Okay, and can I ask a Muslim queue to ask
Yeah, you
a
are.
follow-up
I'm
question?
going to just advance you. You are now on the queue.
Great, thank you. I had a follow-up question which was similar to Councillor Bligh's, but the one part that wasn't asked was just, I wonder if staff have a sense around a community planning exercise is a big endeavor and comprehensive, and we're closing in on the end of this year. Our council term effectively concludes by July, and then after that, we have very few meetings due to the election regulations. So realistically, do we have a sense of when the planning process would be underway, and if this is practical that they'll be doing much liaison, because we won't actually be, we might be commencing a community planning process, for example?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I don't know if Teresa O'Donnell is on the line, but I know Susan Haid is, if Teresa is, and I would wonder if one of you could respond to that question.
Yes, this is Susan Haid, Deputy Director, Long Range Planning. Thank you for the question, Councillor. We would endeavor to bring a planning program, a scope and terms of reference forward to Council as early as possible next year. I don't have explicit timing on that, but certainly we would endeavor to bring that forward as quickly as possible for Council's consideration on a planning process. It could include language reflecting the motion and the intent on council liaisons or extending that. And that would be subject for council's approval to embark on the planning program. And we would certainly anticipate that planning will be underway beyond this term of council. We would be picking up where we left off when the program was paused, expanding per the direction of council approved today, and it would extend into the next term of council, but certainly proceed as expeditiously as possible.
I'll leave it there for time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Kirby Young. Councillor Fry to the amendment.
Yeah, really just to speak briefly, I appreciate Councillor DiGenova's vote of confidence here. And I think this is something that we somehow managed to drop in the in this new term, the role of liaisons for different parts of the city, and I think that's unfortunate. It only sort of came up as Councillor DiGenova was mentioning this, and I think it's a valuable exercise moving forward to help move certain kind of issues and advance issues that are relevant to neighborhoods. I think in this particular case, I'm very happy and to take this role on. I think I can do a good sort of balanced approach, as will Councillor Hardwick. I do appreciate the mayor's concerns, so I look forward to finding out the sort of framework that may or may not preclude us from decision-making processes as a result of this. But I'm confident that whatever our staff bring back will reflect that and allow us to have the same inputs and at the same time be a conduit for some of the neighborhood planning issues. Thanks.
Great.
Councillor
Thanks,
DeGenova.
Councillor Fry. Councillor DeGenova.
Oh, I was going to close, but I see Councillor Weeb's on.
There's others on.
Maybe okay. Maybe I'll just close now. Maybe this will help alleviate some fears. I did think about whether or not I should put in there that this continue on, but honestly, because council, we don't know. For instance, our advisory committees, they're permanent. They continue on for a long time. We're not sure how long this process goes on for. And again, as I'd said, May 30th, 2017. Take a look at the minutes. Wasn't noted there. And I think, either if we want to do something like that, uh, that's fine. But what I was hoping here was that today, when we vote on this, we could assure Replan and Falls Creek South and that neighborhood and community that they do have council liaisons at the table, and that those people, it's not that they can't speak to the rest of council, they can, and I happily will speak to them. And again, I want to be very clear, there's certain things that none of us as council members can talk about, right? I mean, it's right there in our Vancouver charter. But that being said, I appreciate that staff will be outlining the scope of what can be and can't be, included in the roles of liaisons in this position, to make sure that it doesn't fetter them from voting at a public hearing. That being said, I do think that some of the comments that I've heard is there hasn't, it hasn't felt like there is a direct connection with council, and I was just looking for a way to bridge that, and I think in working together here we can achieve that. Also, in council receiving this back from staff, there's an opportunity there. If council says that staff, or if staff says to council that we should in fact move at another time, it could be done as new business at a separate meeting, that we continue this on and it become a regular appointment. Our advisory committee liaisons right now are actually appointed by the mayor's office, not the nominations or sub-nominations committees. So I mean, for me, I'm doing this on the floor of council because I went back and looked at the history since before I'd been here. But in 2017, I remembered councillors Affleck and Reimer, taking on that role and meeting more regularly than some of the rest of us did with the community. So just wanted to provide, that background as to what I've done. And again, it's May 30th, 2017. Happy to send the minutes around if you'd like.
Great, thank you. And just before I advance Councillor Weeb, I know that Councillor DeGenova, you said that you were taking the time to close. So, Clerk, could you just advise Council if in committee you get on a motion or an amendment, the opportunity to speak to it when you move it, as well as speak to it when you as a closing comment, just for all of Council's edification.
Chair Carr, I'm sorry. Could you just repeat the question? What question is it you would like me to answer?
So I believe that we've had the practice of, and I believe it's in our procedure bylaw, that when you move a motion in council, that you have the opportunity to also speak to it separately in closing to it. So you have 2 times to speak to it. Does that also stand for committees?
Yes, sorry. Yes, that is correct.
Great, okay. Yeah, I just did receive a question about that from one of the councillors, so just wanted everybody to be aware.
I'm done. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Councillor Weeb to the amendment.
Yeah, I'll be supportive, and this is exciting. I think it's a great move to have council liaisons to large plan projects and to better connect staff, council, and the public through these difficult decisions and processes. And I hope it's something we actually start to look at on a lot of the other big projects we have moving forward. We have a lot of large planning projects, band plan, Broadway plan, and others that I think it would be really helpful to have a couple of councillor liaisons on. So I look forward to seeing how council supports this and maybe looking at how we move forward as a council and do this on more planning processes in the future, recognizing that when we have done this in the past, it has been very successful. So I will be very supportive and look forward to seeing how this can translate onto other projects.
Great, thank you, Councillor Wiebe. Councillor Hardwick, to the amendment.
I'm grateful and thankful for this amendment and look forward to participating fully. This process for me, it's important to have political leadership from council directly in the process as part of the process. And again, I spent most of my life, it seems like, in one way involved with False Creek or in others. So again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be engaged at this level.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hardwick, and you are the last one to speak. So clerk, could you take us to a vote, please? And that has passed unanimously. Councillor DiGenova, did you have anything else to add? You are on the main queue
No,
now to the amended motion.
I'm not sure why I'm on. Oh, yes, I am.
Because you did an amendment.
Right now. Yes, yes. Thank you for
Okay.
reminding me. I'm sorry, it's been a very long meeting. I will over several days. I'm actually going to. I don't have anything to say at this time.
Okay,
Thank you.
that's great. So I'm not going to advance myself yet because it would start my timer, but I am on the queue to move an amendment. And if I could have the Vice Chair, Councillor Kirby Young, take over the chair while I do that. Thank you.
Okay, I see, Councillor DiGenova, you don't have anything further at this point, correct?
I can't take myself off the queue.
Okay,
I haven't
great.
touched it, I promise. Thank you.
Okay, great. Councillor Carr, you have the floor and you have an amendment. I'm going to just move us to an amendment queue. And can you just put yourself on the queue, please, Councillor Carr? Oh, okay. Hold on a second. Okay, there we go. Okay, now we're
Thank you.
now we're driving.
Good.
I'll ask the clerk to just assist there so that the timer starts.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. Yes, I've forwarded an amendment, and just before I actually speak to the content of the amendment, I wanted to say that it arose in my mind after listening to the speakers in the first group of speakers, and the words of so many people saying over and over, please be bold, please be visionary, as council was in the 1970s. Take the opportunity to do something great in this area, recognizing it is already great. And some of you may not know that I was a graduate student studying urban geography with Professor Hardwick on my thesis advisory committee. At the time, he was on council and came forward with this project. So I heard about it, probably not as much as Councillor Hardwick, but I heard about it every time we were in meetings and at the university. So I took that to heart. And my amendment is asking us as a council to direct staff to be bold, to be visionary in this. Recognizing we are in a different time, and that time is not the same as in the 70s when False Creek was an industrial area that had been industrial for decades. Contaminated soil, pollution, nobody was living there, of course. Today it's much, much different, but we have challenges, and my goal in this amendment is to recognize those new challenges that we have. So I'll address those now, that we have to continue to be bold and visionary and to direct staff to aspire to that bold visionary goal that had been there in the 1970s in its inception, but now recognize that we should be providing a model of affordability, social equity, and inclusion by targeting the variety of housing unit and sizes and tenancy types, specifically for the 1/3 lower income and 1/3 medium income units, because that's where we have the greatest challenge in Vancouver. Secondly, to provide a model of sustainability because our Earth is in jeopardy right now. And the precious green spaces we have need to be recognized. So a model of sustainability by protecting as much park, natural habitats, and green space for recreation, community food gardens, and protection of biodiversity. And then thirdly, to provide a model of climate action through exploring measures, because that is the existential crisis of our times. Through exploring measures to mitigate and provide resilience to the accelerating climate crisis, including targeting zero-emission new construction and ultra-low or zero-emission renovations, as well as ensuring climate adaptation measures such as sea level rise mitigation, and that those are integrated into the development.
Great, thank you, Councillor Carr. I'm not seeing any councillors, just hint, want to speak to this. So I do see Councillor DiGenova. Councillor DiGenova, go ahead.
Well, could I have my timer restarted since we're on a completely different amendment than mine? Thank you. Okay, I just have a point of information, and I appreciate this coming forward, but a point of information, Vice Chair, to you through to our Deputy City Manager. I'm just wondering, in asking Council to participate in this way, if to the other questions about liaisons, does this in any way fetter Council? You know, if we have our own vision, how we're supposed to be balancing that and hearing from the public at times like public hearing and as we approach that, and would there need to be language added to this to that effect? I'm just wondering as the question came up for another amendment about council involvement.
Go ahead, the Deputy City Manager.
Mic on? Yes. Okay, thank you for the question. The language in this amendment talks about, I'm just looking for the words, to aspire to a goal. So this language does start to presuppose a direction that the community planning work could take. I'm going to again refer to our legal department as to whether the term fetter would be appropriate, but it starts to establish a direction. These sorts of directions are normally set out through the community planning process. So maybe first I'll ask Susan Haid to respond to how what kind of implications this would have for the community planning process, and then ask Jeff Greenberg to respond in terms of the legal aspects. So Susan?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Susan Haid, Deputy Director of Planning, Long Range Planning. Yes, we have reviewed the motion. Generally, don't see issue with the intention. However, it would be something that is part of the community planning process and certainly best to incorporate as part of goals and aspirations versus firm targets. And we would just want confirmation from our legal that it indeed reflects that. But all of the intentions are certainly well incorporated into the community planning process as strong goals. So I'll just yeah, hand it over to well, back to Karen and Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sure. Yes, we reviewed the language which is proposed by Councillor Carr here, and we did not feel that it was a fettering of Council's discretion. It's a direction to aspire to bold and visionary goals, which is quite broad, and we did not feel that the Director of Planning, the General Manager of PDS, was in any way being restricted in her exercise of her authority. We also felt that there was language, as you will see in here, regarding targeting certain income mixes, which again was not a fettering of authority to do what is possible in number 2, and number 3 as well is goal oriented and not fettering future discretions.
Okay. And then just a follow-up legal question to that. If we were to hear from the community and their goals were completely different than this, not saying what they will be, that they will be, they won't be, but we could change this and this would not tie council. to this specifically to move forward with the community plan. Is that correct?
Yes, this is in no way restricting the community plan and the results of that plan. If the plan, in your view, did not aspire to what is in here, well, you will have all your authority to give direction in the future as to what you do aspire to deliver.
And just a follow up to that, I'm asking more if the public asks us to aspire to something different. Maybe it's the same, maybe it's different. We could aspire to that, and we have to consider the community's input or the public's input on that, correct? So
Yes.
this doesn't in any way preclude them from changing that depending on their feedback.
No, we don't feel that it precludes the input from
Great.
the public.
Thanks, then I'll support it. That's fine. I just wanted to make sure those questions were answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DiGenova. I'm going to advance Mayor Stewart. Mayor Stewart, go ahead.
Thanks very much. I just want to thank Councillor Carr for bringing this forward. I'll be supportive. I do think that we heard loud and clear over the past months and especially the past few days that these goals are compatible with what the vast majority of folks who live in False Creek South want as their community moves forward, but also what the vast majority of Vancouver residents are looking for. I do think that you know, as a greenest city, it's important for us to make sure that these concepts are embedded into all our work now and going forward. And when I speak to COP 26 next week, it gives me, if this passes, it gives me something to highlight in terms of our current work. So thanks, Chair Carr, for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. And Councillor Weep, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm also very supportive, and I love the idea of a model livable community. We've heard many times, I wish we built more False Creek around the city, and we need more False Creek in Vancouver and less Vancouver and False Creek. So I love the idea that this is a great opportunity for us to be bold and visionary in creating the community that people want. I know so many people that would have loved to have found their way into False Creek and the amount of people that have grown out of it. So this is great for us to continue to be bold and visionary and create a livable community model that we can emulate around the city.
Great. Seeing no further councillors on the queue, I'm going to ask the clerk to take us to a vote.
Point of personal privilege.
Yes, Councillor.
Vote assist.
Vote assist.
In favor, please.
I'm guessing in favor. Thanks. Okay, Councillor, if you can vote on screen. And I will also ask for a vote assist in favor, please, clerk. Yes, thank you. Great. And that has passed unanimously with none in opposition. And that concludes that amendment. So I'll turn the chair back to Councillor Carr.
Okay, great. And I am moving or advancing. We're back to the main queue to the motion as amended. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks, Chair Carr. I just wanted to say a few things in closing on this. And first, a big thank you, as Councillor Fry said, to the huge amount of time that staff have put into this, to answering all of our many, many questions, as you heard, and a huge thank you to all of the speakers and folks we heard from by email, the hundreds of folks who engaged Council on this subject in the last week. It's been incredibly moving to hear from so many residents who love their neighborhood and their neighbors so deeply, and who genuinely want to welcome new neighbors, and in particular, new lower and middle income neighbors into their area. Residents who told us in moving ways what this community means to them and how lucky they feel to be part of it, and how others should get that chance as well. Who spoke to the value of having secure, affordable housing, of being part of a mixed income, mixed tenure neighborhood, and most of all, who spoke to the value of being part of a neighborhood and part of a community where neighbors know and care for one another, where kids run around without a fear of cars, and where parents raise kids without a looming fear of eviction. I think we should have that everywhere. And it really stood out in what we heard from speakers. So I am hopeful that the planning process we're headed into is a good one, where we get to shape the future of this neighborhood for the next 15 years and the next 50 years together with current residents and in the service of future residents as well.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. To the motion as amended, Mayor Stewart.
Thanks very much, Chair. I get the sense that this is going to pass, and I'm really happy about that. I think the amendments are a great addition, and I kind of see it as the canoe getting off the shore, but not without direction. I think that there is a lot of us that are in paddling now, and I think this is a really necessary discussion that we've had, an initial discussion, and the first step toward what will be I think, an enhanced community. I also want to thank all the members that came out to speak, all the community members, to fight for affordable housing in their community. This is to fight for 1/3 low income. To say that we want a third of the residents in our community to be low income, to welcome folks in, is really important, and it's a signal to all other communities and neighborhoods across the city to embrace what I think is the ethos of False Creek. So thanks to the community members who said loud and clear that this community needs to be of mixed income. This beautiful place that folks call home now will have new neighbors coming in, and that we can all move forward together. So I'm really happy with how this has turned out, and I'm happy to support this now amended motion. Also, again, deep gratitude to the staff who've put in so much time into getting us all moving forward together. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Stewart. Councillor Swanson, to the amended motion. You may be muted, Councillor Swanson. Councillor Swanson, we still can't hear you. Try. You might
There.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So this is practically a council love-in, a first for this council. I'm going to vote for this, and I hope we can increase the percent of housing that's affordable for people whose household income is under 50,000. I'm hoping that we can really take advantage of the fact that we own this land, and you can build housing cheaper when you own the land. I think that's got to be where we focus a lot of our attention. And I really hope we can get most of the housing to be nonprofit housing, so the people who live in it don't have to pay the extra costs of the developer's profit. I think we should have some discussion about trying to shift some of the costs of sea level rise, soil mitigation, things like that, to other levels of government or to other taxpayers that benefit from land appreciation, or other levels of government that have progressive taxes like we don't. I think this is a really good lesson in how when you keep up the pressure, you can sometimes get what you want. This is a model community. You could tell from all the people who spoke. I mean, today, I got probably, I don't know, 8 or 10 emails from people opposing housing for homeless people. And this is a community of Falls Creek that welcomed housing for homeless people. I think that's a huge, huge, huge advantage for our city and for their community and for our city to have communities that will do that. I watched as the pressure came in, how the motions, how we and the councillors were talking about amendments, how the amendments that we were thinking of shifted, how they changed from refining the real estate proposal to receiving the real estate proposal for information. And so it shows that the pressure really worked. And I think it's good for citizens to know that sometimes that can happen. So yeah, and thanks to the staff too. I was impressed at the way you answered all of our questions, and Chuck Brooks did some great answers too. So thank you. And I hope this passes like it is.
Thanks, Councillor Swanson. Councillor Fry, to the amended motion.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Also, really want to thank staff, the team that worked on this. Chuck Brook, of course, especially Karen Levitt, who did a lot hard work on this and did take quite a few knocks on this file. And I think that there's been a lot of excellent work. I also want to thank the clerks who put in so much time on this, and thanks to everyone who came and spoke to this. It was a real Herculean effort from the community to show up for this. And I also actually want to thank council, because I think what folks might not realize is that we all did a lot of working across the aisles to come up with solutions based on what we were hearing, trying to be respectful of the work that our staff have put in. And there's been a lot of work that's put in on this, and trying to put this all together. And it's been very stressful. We were commenting earlier about how we've all had a tough time sleeping, and it's been a grind. So I just, I really want to name and acknowledge the fact that this council really worked very well together on this, and I think that that's awesome. So this file has been, kicked down the road for some time, and I think we really did step up and come together as a council. So I just want to highlight that, and I'm proud to work with all of you. I do think to the actual issue at hand and the future of False Creek and the next phase of this planning. I think we've set some direction. I do want to reflect, on the vision that we've talked about, and the idea of thinking bold about this space. I think that there is still that opportunity to think bold. I know earlier in some of my comments I mentioned some more sort of esoteric concepts like tax increment financing and green bonds, and how we might find different opportunities to finance delivery of the kind of communities that we all sort of aspire to as a city. We talk about all the time with affordability and a mixture of tenure and affordabilities and types of people. And I hope that through a renewed planning process and working with the community and PDS and REFM and everybody coming together, we may actually tease out something a little bit more kind of unique and more reflective of the real sort of visionary approach that was taken back in the 1970s with Councillor Hardwick's father and others, and working with CMHC and Falls Creek Development Corp to create this really unique community, recognizing, of course, that in those days the population of Vancouver was a lot smaller. I think it was like 400,000 people in Vancouver back then, and that our population is growing, our city is growing, things are changing. How do we respond to that? How are we inviting new people? I would be remiss if I didn't reflect that I did in listening to the speakers. I felt there was a degree of homogeneity to the folks that came and spoke, and I hope that as we contemplate the future of Falls Creek, that we are bringing more diversity to the voices. One of the speakers talked a bit about unceded territories and highlighted the notion that this needs to engage our diversity of populations, and in particular, the Indigenous folks and folks who've been here, and recognizing that our urban Indigenous population in the city of Vancouver is disproportionately represented in parts of the city, but not this part of the city. So there's a lot of important work that has to happen here, but I'm really very pleased with the work that we've done to get us to this place. And I recognize that change is difficult, and there's always going to be a reluctance to change. And we're going to have to figure out how we navigate this together as a city. And I'm very hopeful. And just thanks to everybody for putting in the hours on this one.
Thanks, Councillor Fry. To the amended motion, Councillor Dominato.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, a couple of reflections as I've been listening intently to all of the speakers and residents and to council and my colleagues. Um, a couple of reflections. One, my mom lived almost the rest of her life out in Falls Creek South, and I fondly remember speaking with her when she was living down there, especially towards the end of her life. She wasn't particularly mobile, and she very much appreciated the amenities in the neighborhood and the proximity of other services and the fact that she could visit and enjoy the seawall from her home. And I do one of the last recollections I have of my mom is she was in a mobile chair and wheeling along the seawall, and it was an area that she really enjoyed living, and she enjoyed the community. And so for me, as I was reflecting on this, it was bringing a lot of memories back of my mother. But I want to particularly thank the residents who called in and those who came in person to speak to council about this, because this is your neighborhood. And I heard very clearly from residents that there was quite a lot of angst and fear around this conceptual framework that was brought forward. But I also heard a lot of passion around what community members feel about their community, about their neighborhood, that in many cases was actually multi-generational. We heard from residents who had grown up in Falls Creek South, whether it be in co-ops or other tenure, and were now raising their own kids, and that they hoped that others might benefit from that in the future. And so while there was angst about the process and the approach, I did hear very clearly that residents of Falls Creek South are wanting to embrace more people, and that there is an opportunity to provide more opportunities for others to come and enjoy this wonderful neighborhood. And so a lot of the conversation did center around housing, around affordability, around security of housing, as well as the importance of building on the legacy, as Councillor Hardwick has noted numerous times, of the mixed income, mixed tenure. But it didn't stop there. When I heard residents talk about the neighborhood, it also was around not just housing, but the ability, the walkability of the neighborhood, the not having to have a reliance on a vehicle, being able to enjoy the park space that's there. And so just acknowledging that it is a bigger conversation than simply about housing, but it is about community. And that came through very clearly, the interconnectedness of individuals who are living there, the families, the caregiving that goes on between neighbors. And I know that from having conversations with friends who also live in the neighborhood and reached out to me around these deliberations. And so wanting to acknowledge that, also acknowledge the hard work of staff in trying to bring this forward, and Mayor Stewart did acknowledge it, that he asked some questions about process and why it came forward this way. But I do feel with the amendments that have come forward by my colleagues, that we've landed in a better place in terms of next steps and a process that will be collaborative and iterative and will involve community members in a meaningful way, while at the same time addressing the leases and the pending expiries of those. So I will support the amended recommendations that have come forward, and thank both residents and staff for the hard work. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Councillor Dominato. Councillor Kirby Young.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to be brief, but I just want to offer a few comments. And I think I think the most important things is to proceed with those lease extensions, because that's the one thing I hear hanging over people's heads the most, whether it's the strata freehold, but also on the co-ops, is knowledge about individual situations and being able to deal with that sort of imminent stress and the angst that has caused to people. So I'm really glad that that's moving forward. I think that's critically important, and that everybody have gained certainty around that. So I just want to highlight that. I think that's actually one of the key things here. I really appreciated hearing from the community. I don't think that there is anything that is more fundamental to people than the stability of home, or more intrinsically valuable than the connection that is forged by community. And we heard loud and clear that that's really what False Creek South represents. I also think that the community does need to evolve and grow, but we can't do that in a way that the existing community doesn't feel that the spirit of their community is retained, or that they don't feel part of it or feel disenfranchised. So I hope that sort of council coming together on this and how this has been framed really provides that assurance. I guess I also have an ask of both staff and the community in this process is to try to really build on sort of the positive foundation that's set here to move it forward, because the longer that that process does take, the longer it will take to secure senior government funding for some of those pieces. And even with lease renewals, time goes really quickly. And we're going to need that significant investment. We're going to want collectively to advance a bold vision for this area to get people excited about it for the next iteration. And it is a different challenge today than it was in the 70s. And what was delivered was something to aspire to, but people had the opportunity to start with essentially an industrial area and a brownfield site. And now we have the complexity in a bit of a different moment in time where we have an existing community to respect and support, and then find a way to bring in other neighbors. And so I would really like to see us get some traction on that process to help move forward so that we can build on what's there, but build the next legacy and the next vision, right? Which I think is something everybody else could be really proud of, to see that coming forward. And so that's a big part for me. I actually am really deeply interested and excited to see what role, an expanded role, the nonprofits can have here. And I'd love to hear, and I really look forward and encourage staff to sort of have some really, pie in the sky type of conversations around different models that might be trialed, and maybe they won't work across all the sites. Maybe they'll work in a building or two or something, but that we could demonstrate a legacy of difference, because I think the nonprofits can play a huge role. They can develop and they can also manage and operate both market and non-market housing, and potentially deepen affordability over time. And some of that, again, we'll have to go through all the pragmatics of that in terms of feasibility. But I really want to kind of see what ideas the nonprofit sector can bring to the table. And my sort of final point is really around this notion of complete communities, if you want to use that lingo or what that actually means, but just a good quality place for people to live. So I'm passionate about protecting the park space, because there will be different people involved in the planning process if it goes on too long. And some of that knowledge from the residents might get lost. There will be a different council that's sitting here. And again, I think that's a good reason to try to get a solid vision in the ground, and hopefully not just protect, but expand that park space for people, because we will have more neighbors and more folks living there. And that's part of what sort of adds to the quality of it. So as well as sort of the connectivity and transportation piece. So sorry, that was a bit longer than I anticipated, but hopefully that shares some perspective, and I'm glad we got here. And thanks to everybody for all the passion they put into this topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Wiebe.
Yeah, this is a difficult conversation, and I appreciate the openness of councillors, the public, and our staff to have those discussions, conversations, listen to each other. We've been listening on this conversation for years. I know staff have been doing it for even longer. So I really appreciate that people were willing to come to the table, talk, listen, hear about each other, and really move forward. So I think we've come to a good place. It wasn't easy. And there's also some people that are really struggling that are in False Creek that talked about they really need to have closure on what is happening with their leases. So I am also supportive that we are moving forward to negotiate, because it can be difficult when you don't know what's going to happen to your home. So I do appreciate what we've done moving forward. The stories, when we started to work on the Vancouver plan, one of the things they talked about was what was the place you loved in Vancouver the most, and what do you think was best designed? And for me, I think that bridge to walk into that waterfall is one of the most amazing elements we have in the city of Vancouver. And I continue to try to find ways to do one in Kinross Park and the Fraser River District and others, because I think we need to emulate what False Creek has, and we need more False Creek in the city of Vancouver. Today we were talking about how we are in the middle of a lot of crises, and we want this work to do a lot And I heard someone speak today saying that we need to live in the unthinkable. Things that we thought weren't possible is where we need to be living if we want to be part of a climate-friendly world where we care for each other and we're compassionate and we know our neighbors and we support our neighbors. And I think there's a lot of people that don't feel Vancouver is a place that they feel connected, but the people in False Creek really do. And I think that's something we need to take moving forward, is how do we connect more people to Lend. One of the things that's getting me excited is we had a UBC cohort last year vision out what False Creek could look like with some amazing ideas and looked at different examples from around the world, as well as why this is such an example for others around the world. And just seeing some of the ideas of what a bold, visionary community could build on what is there, I'm excited. I hope the community is excited, because I think there's going to be some interesting decisions coming forward on what False Creek could look like in a way that we can emulate across the city. So appreciate all of everyone's help on this, and I think it's great, and I will be supportive.
Thank you, Councillor Wiebe. Councillor Hardwick.
Well, thank you. Deep sigh of relief. You know, False Creek South has been internationally recognized as an example of getting it right in urban design since its inception in the mid-1970s, as we've heard. And the complex neighborhood was designed and constructed drawing on an interactive, consultative public process. Its approach to policy development and implementation in urban design have been cited to help meet challenges in other cities around the world. And I was deeply concerned that we were going to be destroying that legacy. And I found the situation deeply ironic, because False Creek exists because in part of the backlash in the 1960s towards a technocratic political system, and the then commitment to see political leadership wrest direction of civic affairs away from the bureaucracy, and to put it, I would argue, to its rightful function of managing program implementation. Bureaucratic government is designed to manage and control, not to lead the change. And in the new world beginning in the 1970s, after the 60s and power to the people, the politicians directed. So I was really concerned with where we were today, because council was, in my view, acting as trustees, nominally adopting the recommendations from staff. And I was concerned that the pendulum had swung back to the technocratic model, which we were seeing in the report from the corporate leadership team of the city and its real estate division. And to me, that process is upside down and backwards. But I'm more satisfied with the outcome that we've seen today. But in just talking a little bit more about the background, in the 60s, False Creek was a polluted inlet surrounded by partially abandoned industrial and railway lands. And Councillor Wiebe just touched on a UBC project. It was in 1965 that a project at UBC Geography and Architecture addressed the future role of these central marginal lands. And following socioeconomic and design analysis, it was recommended that industrial uses be abandoned, which was revolutionary at the time, and the area be integrated into the fabric of the city with residential and commercial activities placed within a major waterfront park that we enjoy so much today and recreational system. But it was a political decision that was made to take the initiative, and following the 1970 election, there was a special committee on False Creek comprised of council members to develop this project. And so it had that strong political leadership that I keep coming back to, that it was assured, and it was the judgment of council that the professional planners should not implement the project, nor the city's property department, which is real estate, without that leadership. So the committee formulated the terms of reference, such as the area should be dominantly residential, households should be mixed, providing accommodation of people of different ages, status, incomes, and there should be a continuous pedestrian walkways throughout linking parks. The waterway should be accentuated and the automobile should be downplayed. So tied to all of this was the sense of community affiliation and involvement. And so, you know, these were the days of Jane Jacobs, and social mix was set as a goal by the city council of the time. Because ironically, there was a fear that the waterfront housing might become the preserve of the wealthy, or the area would be taken over by the large baby boomer cohort that was coming of age at the time. So the plan for False Creek took advantage of the best knowledge of the day for creating livable communities. And the planning was incremental in the sense that the various patterns were given priorities, plans were simulated, and then presented for the political judgment and eventual endorsement. So we are the beneficiaries of the collective wisdom of the day, and the residents of False Creek are particularly aware of this. And the right thing is to build on this achievement, not destroy it. So I'm really glad that we've recommitted to False Creek as a livable community and saving it for the whole city. As one of our speakers said, grow it, don't blow it. And finally, in the words of another former councillor, Tim Lewis, who spoke to us, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hardwick. And that is it. Council, I think we can be moved to a vote on this amended motion. And that is unanimously passed. Well done, everyone. Very, very nice to have attendees here. Thank you, staff, for this incredible work that you've done. Thank you to the public who are here and have been here through this report. That takes us to conclusion on this. And I'm just looking to see, and we're at the end of the agenda, so I think the Standing Committee is now adjourned. We are complete. We will convene in council with Mayor Stewart as chair to deal with the recommendations and actions from today's committee meeting.
Thanks, Chair Carr. We're going to reconvene in council to deal with the actions from October 21st, 26th, 27th. Can we have the Deputy Clerk, can we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Mayor Stewart in the chair, Councillor Carr.
Here.
Councillor DeGenova.
Present.
Councillor Fry.
Here.
Councillor Swanson.
Here.
Councillor Hardwick.
Present.
Councillor Weep.
Present.
Councillor Boyle.
Present.
Councillor Dominato.
Present.
Councillor Bligh.
Present.
Councillor Kirby Young. The meeting has quorum, Mayor Stewart.
Thanks very much. We need a motion to adopt the Standing Committee's recommendation for item 2. Can I have a mover?
So moved. Councillor Carr.
Right. Councillor Carr, I heard, a seconder.
Second.
Councillor DeGenova, thanks very much. All those in favor say yay.
Yay.
Opposed, nay. Thanks very much. That motion is carried unanimously. Can we have a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion
So
to
moved.
adjourn, please.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Hardwick, seconded by Councillor Carr, I heard. All in favor say yay.
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 Opposed, nay. There we go. So that's carried unanimously too. The meeting is adjourned. Clerks, anything else we need to know? Otherwise, we'll see everybody on Tuesday in council.
Yes, that's good.
Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Have a good
Night,
night,
everyone.
everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Great
Good
job,
night.
Chair. Great job, team. Awesome.